Loki and the Norns. Have you ever wondered why life is so unfair? Why good people sometimes die young, and why evil people sometimes seem to live forever? So, while the evening is long and cold, and the fire is warm and keeps the shadows away, gather round and hear the reason why, and maybe learn why other things are the way they are too. It was the first days, and the Aesir and the Vanir had not long made their truce, and exchanged hostages to keep the peace. Every morning, the Aesir and their hostages rode out over the Bifrost Bridge from their home in Asgard to hold their thing, which just means meeting, at the base of the great world tree Yggdrasil. What a sight they were to behold, great and terrible. Odin, the All-Father and chieftain of the gods, always arrived first on his 8-legged horse Sleipnir. His son, Thor, in his drawn chariot, was nearly always lost, as he took a detour to quell his temper by killing a giant or two. This always put him in a good mood. Odin would use the time while they waited for Thor to greet the 3 greatest Norns, the giantesses Uro, Viruandi and Skuld. These chatted and sang as they spun the threads of the lives of men, giving them the fates that they deserved. For in those days life was fair, and good men lived good lives and had good deaths. The best of these were collected by Skuld, who would tell the Valkyries those who should inhabit Odin's feast hall. Skuld was unusual, as while she was a giantess, she rode with these choosers of the slain. While the gods waited for Thor, Gersemi, the daughter of Freya, would sit by the well of Uro and feed nuts to the squirrel Ratatosk. Would spent his day running up and down the great world tree and telling tales to all he met. If you'd seen him, however, I doubt you would have thought he was a squirrel, as he had a horn growing from his head and was fully white like all squirrels then. Now, the son of the great giant Farbuti, Loki, who is blood brother to Odin, was often bored. Being a quick thinker and fast of action, he had little to do while he waited for Thor. Then he'd even be more bored, because Thor took his time to think decisions over. Thor used his huge muscles far more than he used his brain. Like Odin, Loki too sometimes took the chance to chat to the Norns, but unlike Odin, he had not hung from the gallows tree and sacrificed his right eye for wisdom, and he yearned to understand the complex weave they created, to see how lives interacted and changed. Even in those days, he was a trickster, and he wanted to be able to use the weave to play his games with men's fates. One day he chatted to the youngest Norn, who as a giant herself was quite taken in by his bright green eyes, fair face and honeyed words. Skuld tried in vain to explain the complex weave, and Loki tried in vain to understand. But it was just beyond even his agile mind. Trying to take his mind off this, as she could see his frustration, she told him that every day she and her sisters took water and sand to the branches of Yggdrasil to keep it from rotting. Sly Loki smiled inwardly, for this had given him an idea. For the next 9 days he watched the Norns leave and return, hiding in the pool as a fish, as an eagle in the branches of the tree, and as a cat curled up in the sun. The following day, Loki, knowing the Norns paid little attention to what occurred after the thing, waited quietly behind, eating nuts in the shade of Yggdrasil. He watched the elder 2 Norns gather water and sand in buckets while the youngest rode out with the Valkyries. Then he slipped over to the loom the Norns used to ensure all men's fates were fair. He marvelled, and he teased a thread of the finest gossamer. As he did, he saw it tangled lower down, and in his panic he tried to untangle it. The more he tried, the worse it got, as more and more strands twisted together, making a knot like no other. As he tried and tried in vain, he felt something tugging at his pocket, and looking down, he saw Ratatosk nibbling on one of his forgotten nuts. Now, Loki is not the nicest person, using others for his own ends without care, and sometimes even for spite. He saw an opportunity. He gently stroked the squirrel, then suddenly reached down and grabbed its horn. With a twist he snapped it off to use as a needle. Now, as you can imagine, Ratatosk was not too impressed, and he bit hard into Loki's thumb. Loki screamed and dropped both the squirrel and horn into the weave, further tangling it and cutting many threads short. Blood fell from Loki's thumb, landing on Ratatosk, turning him and all his descendants red, except on their bellies where the blood didn't fall. In his panic, the fleeing Ratatosk further tangled the weave. He leaves our tale now running up the tree to the eagle at the top. Now, whether this experience was the cause of all the malicious gossip, but since that day he spreads only ill will and hateful gossip. At this point, the youngest Norn returned, fortunately before Loki could do any more damage. She screamed at him, understanding his betrayal at once and drawing her sword. At the sound of this, alarmed, the other two came hurrying back, dropping their buckets of water and sand. For once, the silver-tongued Loki didn't try and talk his way out of trouble. He could see the fury of all three Norns. He transformed himself into an eagle and tried to fly away, but Skuld gave chase on a horse, rising up after him as she did when collecting the souls to go to Valhalla. Seeing this, Loki dived towards the sea, and just before he hit the water, he shimmered and changed, feathers turning into fur as he became an otter and splashed into the water. Skuld could not follow him, so giving a scream of rage, she swung her horse round and returned to the sisters. The Norns tried to restore the pattern to the weave, but it was twisted and tangled beyond even their skills. They did their best to repair it and tried to match good lives and good ends to good people, and bad lives and bad ends to bad people, but they couldn't always do this. Some knots were so tangled that they just had to be cut, ending lives before their time. Since then, life has been unfair for people, and all we can do is live as best as we can, and there's no use bemoaning the fate, but instead we must just accept it, and maybe curse the trickster for what he did. But the story doesn't end there. The Norns can be capricious and hateful. They called all their weaker cousins together, be they giant or elf or dwarf, and brought them down a great curse on all of Loki's descendants. The benevolent Norns who appear at children's births and bring them gifts agreed never to appear for any of Loki's children, and in their stead the malevolent Norns only would attend, so no child of Loki would ever have good fortune. And indeed, you can read elsewhere how bad their fate was, no matter who was their mother. The fire's starting to die now, so we must leave this story. I'll tell you another story tomorrow evening, when the fire makes that world magical twilight place between light and dark. The end.